I'm the director of creative writing, and I'm really happy today to host Janaka Stucky, who's come from Boston. Some people like Boston. He is the author of The Truth Is We Are Perfect, The World Will Deny It For You, and Your Name Is the Only Freedom, and also this book, Ascend, Ascend, which is going to be reading from today. Earlier today, he regaled us with the tales of his upbringing in an ashram, and how that learning to meditate from the time of being a child, hours of chanting in the dark, helped him writing this book at an artist residency. He's in an old church. He sat in a tower for 20 days, practiced things he'd learned in an unorthodox upbringing to come in and out of trance state as he wrote this poem. He's on an extended tour of the country. Usually he performs in a kind of high-tech, ritualistic, maximalist kind of theater, but today he's showing up for us a little bit more stripped down form, but it'll still be great and amazing to hear. So please welcome Dan.
This will be my unplugged set. So, acoustic, a cappella, as we call it. Thanks everyone for coming out. It was a great turnout. I'm going to get right into it in a second, but I just wanted to do a little preamble, and then we'll talk about the work or whatever else you guys want to talk about afterwards, climate change, whatever. In this work, you'll hear some religious language, and I guess the thing I like to say before reading is that for me the book is still a secular piece of literature, that you can be agnostic, you can be atheist, you can also have your own belief system, you can be Muslim, you can be Hindu, Christian, Jewish. I myself have a potpourri of backgrounds. My mother's side of the family was Jewish, my father's side of the family was Episcopal, but I was raised in a Hindu ashram, and then we visited mosques and Tibetan lamas. So that all gets ground up and spit out in a sort of maximalist piece of poetry here. But the reason I bring it up is because for me, poetry or art in general is a variety of mystical experience. And when I say mystical experience, I mean that as distinct from religious. Because a mystical experience would be one that is a direct, unmediated access to the divine, the great mystery, the dread and awe that is at the core of our human existence. And that direct, unmediated access is anti-hierarchical, it is anti-patriarchal. I think it's somewhat anarchic, and it's definitely a momentary place of freedom. And so I see, in that sense, I see poetry or art as a variety of mystical experience, and then I see religion as a subgenre of art. I guess that's all I want to say about it. The poem is, it's a book-length poem in 7 sections. I'm just going to read the whole thing. It'll take a couple of hours. No, I'll do the first 2 sections. The book is structured, it's in 7 sections that slowly climb the Kabbalistic tree of life with the 10 Sephirah. And that is then broken into 4 material worlds, the elements, right? So we have earth, and then air, and then water, and then fire. That's the way they're ordered. So I'm going to do earth and then air for you. Blessed is the lotus, the day's bleeding womb. Blessed are the spiders, their alphabet 26 stones, my corpse is dancing. Blessed are the worms, the maggots, sexless and probing like tongues through the rotting soil. Blessed is the loam, the darkness, mushrooms blooming, teeth pushing through the earth's black and putrid gums. Blessed is the maw, the great maw, the mouth, the gnashing of continental shores. Blessed are the stones, the rocks, the island, all the world, a promontory scab, hardening around the earth's myriad molten wounds. Blessed is the blood, the bile ascending, the gross moss of shapeless years forming on the eyeless trunks of trees. Blessed are the snakes, the dragons breathing, the giants eating, each dumb beast our mothers, our fathers filled with blood. Blessed are the black cricket's legs singing furiously until the whole lake is on fire. Blessed is the fire, blessed is the lake, blessed are the cricket's black legs. Blessed is the trembling nerve of now, the great topaz hurtling through galactic dark. Blessed is the dark, the knotted roots of the first tree, the fearful serpent uncoiling still as even the first stone turns to dust. Blessed is our fear, the great retching which rips us wide-eyed, hairy and blood-spattered, terribly laughing up from the mud. Blessed is the transfiguration of terror that wakens the crimson thread within. Blessed is our weaving and crawling, our braiding. Blessed is our climb. Blessed are we who flop from mud to soil, to grass, to trees. Blessed are our lungs, our hands. Blessed is the transmutation of air and fruit and meat to spirit. Blessed are the bees. Blessed is their hive returning through each flaw of rain, revealing the hierophany of nectar in the fresh light of the cloud's empty womb. Blessed is our moaning and shitting, our walking on quivering feet. Blessed is our walking and running, our speaking each day, our dying, our struggle toward freedom, our dying. Blessed is the fight for freedom even more than to be free. Blessed is our life. Blessed is our instrument responding with purity to the collapsing sigh of the world. Blessed is our cry, our radiant repeating, the gleaming cinder like honey, like wax, like roses, the world vanishing and nothing but us remaining beneath the abyss of God, singing, I am the one that is not. And when the cry comes to no longer be the vessel, the cry comes not from your mouth alone It is not you talking. It is centuries upon centuries of ancestors speaking. It is not you alone desiring. It is a galaxy of descendants desiring down the long, fathomless pillar of your infinite heart. For between the void and the abyss, you alone struggle and are imperiled. And in your small earthen chest, one thing alone struggles and is imperiled. And when the cry comes in the cryptic tongue to pass beyond my body, bastion of sugar and bone, my body monstrously shining above black lichen rivers, its curse like a star of blood erupting from my throat. A promise roaring, jackals howling, awful and grim. My body, lust magnificent views of Byzantium, crucified, awake in me among. My body, idle and brutal, let like thunder the first to adore. My body, my ghost, my retinue of ghouls, profane and dancing, dizzy drunk and shrieking through a phantasmagoria of stars. My body, exquisite thighs streaming with blood. My body, hungry and gaping, threaded with hands. My body, my tongue, distended and dangling amid corpses and non-corpses. Gung, gung, drone the bees. My body, my mouth, my penetrated mouth, singing through the honeycomb locked in its jaws. My penetrated body, levitating weightless, rotted by this leprous alien song. I am penetrated, I am penetrated, I am pierced. My body, my elephant, my chariot, I am pierced. I am penetrated by men. I am penetrated by insects, plants, and beasts, the ecstatic march of flesh. I am penetrated by birds, by stones, and the wind's twisted shell. I am penetrated by seas and fires, by horns, by colors, by wings, by claws, by constellations, butterflies. I am penetrated by great hemlocks blackening the moonless sky. I am penetrated by water, by dreams, by lightning cracks and mute night. By night, thick as death, it must be death. I am penetrated by death and cannot see. And beneath the night sky, the universe of every eye, judging acutely with their small fires, igniting to the orchard the path within me. Every word along the way lit like a flame upon the wick of its origin. I kiss each name and make for it a temple on my tongue. I name a stone. I name an insect. I name an idea dancing across a dust mote's horizonless stage. I name a nightmare ecstasy. I name sleep a fertile wall of storms. I name the air choked with a blizzard of blossoms, white origin of apples, buzzing on the wild threadless sun. I name the eye of the earth blinking in my blood, a phenomena of swarms. I name the hour black lightning and its children golden sheaves of fire burning Lanka to the ground. I name this fever a flood like a harass of feral horses breaking on the blackened plain, and the trembling shale of stardust is its name. The sky lit by heaping nectar is its name. The cloud whose throne is a corpse is its name. Dwell in its presence in dread is its name. Reflect on the root from which you were hewn is its name. An act without knowledge is nothing is its name. The seven heavens of chaos is its name. Vilon is its name. Rakia is its name. Shehakim is its name. Zavul is its name. Ma'on is its name. Makun is its name. Heravot is its name. A curtain like the hum of a severed head is its name. The firmament scattered like a riddle is its name. The millstone grinding bright miracle of wheat is its name. A silver bridge of the dead returning to their infinite numinous source is its name. A choir of thousands terrifying, slow, and rising from a single mouth is its name. Scorched by the awestruck jism of a new element is its name. Amen, amen, Nizah, Selah is its name. There is a precise instant when the world is marvelous. Now is its name. I hear its cry. I hear its cry lacerated by a paradise of sadness, devoured by brutes. I hear its cry ashen with the incandescent dust of rubies. I hear its cry, I rise, weeping, a moth emerging from the innocence of limbo beneath the green bowers. I hear its cry dissolving in a golden beam. I invent new beasts, new flowers, new stars, new men, new holes, pool of Bethesda, new flesh, new tongues, new purity, oh purity, this vision of purity, erect for the brief bliss of the void. With their pestilential breath abating, I leave the hazel copse. I depart through nameless, numberless years, climb the cosmic mountain, parapets of jasper shining above the mallow groves. Wading through thickets of cypress, I approach the navel of the earth. From the trunk of a gum tree, I fashion the sacred pole. Anoint it and climb. Belligerently ascend and climb. Further still, I climb and disappear into the sky. I exchange the world for this strange thing which is flight. And though I flee, none pursue. For reasons stronger than the provision of law, I ascend with agony. For reasons inherent in tears and grief, in death, in blood, in gestures, in objects, I ascend with agony. For reasons inherent in matter itself, I ascend with agony. I ascend a trembling phosphorescence, dragging itself upwards into the immense blue of every distant dawn. I ascend with agony and watch the tremulous invisible by way of crowning horror tread on all living things. Ascending, I ascend, I ascend. I am the name itself, the is itself. I am the limit of the great dream, the secret immediate movement from which the milk of our unknowing pours forth. I unbind in the slow faint of the invisible and have only the order of my breath. The liturgy of dissonant swarms, ascend, ascend. Here where the ravenous mane of devotion is whispered in each worshipful beating, I ascend. I ascend with agony the music of great abandonment, blossoming in the decay of which I am assured. I ascend with agony a center of luminous vapor, shedding its garments of malediction, the gravity of this return. I ascend with agony to conquer the temptation of hope. Free from the terror of my seeking heart, I ascend. I ascend with agony above the inexhaustible graveyard of the earth. I ascend. I ascend with agony my unextinguished body, blackening like a thistle at the edge of its radiant limbs. I ascend. I ascend with agony amid fetid groans, echoing the nausea of sobbing fruits. I ascend. I ascend with agony, debauched and suffocating in the voice of my own destruction. Ascending, I ascend, I ascend. I ascend with agony, vibrating in the stillness of every orphaned hand. I ascend with agony, mutilated by sadness at the world's eclipsing eye. I ascend with agony this wagon of dying, each wheel driven through hordes by the invisible whip. I ascend, I ascend, I ascend with agony, drowning in the corpse of vinegar, honey and milk dripping from the lion's flesh, the ox and eagle, drinking the bestial tides of heaven. Ascending, I ascend with agony from the chestnut of sorrow, the beautiful communal name of the breath that will wreck you on the banks of millioned bodies, writhing through a brilliant storm of intestines, the shimmering ulcer of fuck. I ascend with agony and psalm the black honey of my circumcision. I ascend with agony through milky smoke of cypress burning, a flaming bed for the counterfeit of moonlit night. I ascend with agony, ascending, I ascend, a diamond forming like tears drying in 10,000-year-old excrement of the dead. I ascend with agony, the gleaming rib of an angel, spinning in silent adoration for the dust beyond the white gate ascending. I ascend with agony, I ascend a sepulchre companionless, my empty skull soundlessly drunk on the laughter of tears. I ascend with agony, devouring the ashes of my waking, the black river of solitude glorified, amphibian hunger of our legion decadent spleen. I ascend with agony, a wingless sword anointed in the violet pus of stars. I ascend with agony, embroidered to the alphabet of a ceaseless jasmine sun. I ascend with agony, hardening like wax in the absent dream of fire. I ascend with agony, the poverty of a scythe that drives its saying across the centuries' lilac face. I ascend with agony and write my affliction in the homesick ravines of my terrifying hands. I ascend with agony, my mouth open above the world, a vapor of blood. I ascend with agony, lamenting like grass blades over each syllable of hell, buried in the marvelous wine of the earth. I ascend chalk, dust, and sunlight. I ascend a fluvium of despair. I ascend a Stygian tide of black flies carcassing the wind. I ascend with agony, the city of my torso, tattered by the numinous spell of flowers, knives, and beating wings. I ascend with agony, ascending a sunflower weapon blinking in the butchered glorious hum. I ascend with agony, the music of rotting apples chafing my scented skull. I ascend with agony, caparisoned by poppies, by black stars, and the shivering tissue of vice. I ascend with agony, drinking fever, drinking storms, my storms. Drinking storms, I ascend into the sky like a bronze gate. I ascend, sky like a roofless church with birds of flame perched along its rim. I ascend, sky like great teeth of the sea, rabid with lilacs of foam. I ascend, sky like a blade of light, cutting the umbilical cord of I ascend. Sky like primordial honey, I ascend. Sky like mellifluous rot, I ascend. Sky like a garden dug with the white edge of a scream, I ascend. Sky, my hour, my night, my dark wings beating the fountain, the flood that comes before the abyss, I ascend. Sky like the death of juniper, quivering in the clitoral spell of sleep. Sky that wakes like acacias, blind from the cradled soil. Sky like a great and boundless longing, setting fire to itself, ascending, I ascend, I ascend, I ascend with agony, a blackbird egg hatching in the alcove of a lion's jaw. I ascend with agony, devoured and spiraling upwards into countless crowns. I ascend with agony, summoning a plague of flowers, white blood swirling against their indestructible, glistening cheeks. I ascend with agony, lifted alone by the memory of milk. I ascend with agony, the guillotine of my laughter, raised high above the neck of the wind. I ascend with agony through an omega of astonishment. I ascend with agony, carved from the wind by the knife that bears my sign. I ascend with agony in the solstice of humiliation. I shall love, I shall love, I shall love. I ascend in the bright flame of marigolds. I shall love, I shall love, I ascend.
Fantastic work. Janaka has agreed to take some questions. If you have questions, you just heard. From the practical to the theoretical.
It can be critiques too.
So I have a question. I'd love to hear you talk more about what you think it means to sustain something in poetry, whether that's the pitch that you often hit in performance, or sustaining, say, a phrase that would repeat. So that relationship between a repeated phrase or hitting a pitch, and what that means for kind of your inhabited sense of this poem.
Yeah, that's a great question. There are two very different answers, whether we're talking about pitch or language itself. For language itself, it's right there. It's interesting because, for me, prior to this book, I wrote very short, for the most part, lyric poems that rarely ever went beyond a page, and usually were even just like 10 lines or something like that. So, in writing this book, I think that there is something inherent to, if we want to call it, transpoetics or prophetic lyric or whatever you want to call it, where the repetition of language has this sort of shredding of semantic meaning. And through that repetition, you're doing two things. I think especially in this work, I'm both expanding the meaning, but I'm expanding it so much that it becomes meaningless. But through that, you're also, in some sense, sharpening the semantic, because what I'm trying to do in this work, and I think often what poetry is trying to do, is to say the unsayable or to describe the ineffable. And so there's almost like if you want to talk Western esotericism, there's the via negativa, or this sort of negative theology and there's actually a corollary in Eastern Vedantic Hinduism. It's neti neti, not this, not this. So it's like you describe the ineffable by describing what isn't the ineffable. It's like it's not this, it's not this, it's not this. And then there's also the opposite of that, where which I think we're maybe a little more used to in mainstream scripture from Semitic religions or Abrahamic religions, which is inclusive. It's like God is this, But I think they're doing the same thing. Is that either through exclusion or inclusion, it's building and building and building until it becomes meaningless, and then through that dissolution, you're actually getting to the thing that you can't talk about. So that's the language part. From the total perspective, for me, and this is true not even just in my performance or in long poetry, but even in short poetry, I think of silence in poems. I take my cues from old blues musicians, or at least blues-based rock and roll. I think like garage rock. So I'm published by Third Man Books, which is an imprint of Third Man Records, which is Jack White's record label. The musician Jack White from the White Stripes. And I was a fan of the White Stripes like a decade before I got published by them. But I think he's a great example too. What makes him such a great guitar player and what makes those blues musicians so compelling, and I'm thinking like old blues musicians, is that the guitar solo comes in where language fails. So the song gets to a point, the lyrics get to a point where they're trying to, again, get to that ineffable, describe this feeling that language can no longer get to what I'm trying to express, so I'm going to express myself through this guitar solo. And that's what I see the role of silence in poetry, in my own poetry. I don't want to speak for anyone else's, but how I think of silence in the work is I get to a breaking point where no matter what I write, it's failing. And it's time to break the line or break the stanza. And this is pretty... this book is fair. It's mostly couplets, but there are some single lines. But in my older book over here, I'm doing more with, not a lot more, but you'll see that there's often I don't know if you can see from there, but there are 2 or 3 lines skipped sometimes. And for me, that's like musical notation, like pause this long for 1 break, pause twice as long for 2 breaks, pause 3 times as long. I don't know if that answers the sustained tone thing, but that's about as close as I can get to it.
I think you may have just answered my question. I'll ask it anyway. I'm just curious about the whole notion of performance, and struck me as that word doesn't really fit what you did here.
The word performance.
Yeah, because it has sort of like that or this or acting or something like that, and you enter into this other zone.
Yeah, so I've been, as I tour, one of the things I've struggled with, the publisher has struggled with, our publicist has struggled with, is how to describe my shows. Because I'm touring behind a book of poetry, but if I say I'm giving a reading, that's even further from describing what I do than performance. And it wasn't actually until a couple of weeks ago. So I've been talking a lot about trance and writing from trance and going into trance. But at a certain point, and I only hit on this a couple of weeks ago, it almost feels like possession to me a little bit. But not like another entity, just kind of like a releasing of the self to allow an other to enter. And the other is the poem, I guess.
Can you talk about how you see that in relation to someone reading your book?
Like someone reading my book, but for themselves.
Right.
Well, it's actually interesting that this book, my new book, has a foreword by Pam Grossman, who she just had a book come out herself called Waking the Witch, Reflections on Women, Magic, and Power. And she has a podcast called The Witch Way. If anyone has the witch emoji on the witch emoji set on their phone, she also created that. But she talks about in her foreword the experience. She had never seen or heard me read the work when she was writing the foreword to the book, and she talks about going out into the woods and reading it for herself out loud. And I think that it is a different experience, for sure. But my hope is that anyone, whether it's my book or any book of poetry, at some point takes the time to read that work out loud for themselves. That was my entrance into poetry as a teenager. When I was just starting to write my own poems. I grew up in New England, and I would go out into the woods in New England. But it doesn't have to be the woods. It's just nice there because then no one sees you. But I would go out into the
dorm room. It's also
dorm room, a car, whatever. They'll just think you're singing along to a song or something. But I would read all these poets out loud and just hear what the language sounded like and feel the language in my mouth. And I think that is an important part of experiencing so much of poetry. I don't want to say all poetry, but a lot of poetry. But I can't, I don't know. I don't know what other people's experiences of reading for themselves. You guys can talk.
Valerie.
Can you elaborate more on what you meant by religion as a form of art?
Religion is essential.
Yeah.
So it goes back to, I think of the mystical experience as the core of human spirituality, and that is like a very personal experience, and it doesn't have to be in a religious setting or a church or anything like that, and it doesn't even have to have the trappings of religion. Right? I think of a mystical experience as that moment where you're suddenly like very radically present and unexpected, and that constant inner monologue that you have going stops for like 2 seconds. Like we've all had that experience. You're driving or you're walking along, and you're like, I gotta get some groceries for tonight. I gotta pay my phone bill, and I got this paper due tomorrow, whatever. And then all of a sudden you see the light coming through the storm clouds or something, and for just like a minute, oh yeah, and then I got to do this thing, and and you have. But that moment, that pause, that's a moment of aesthetic shock, and I think that aesthetic shock brings us into this very present, like immortal kind of place. And that, to me, that's like a micro-mystical experience. And so much of meditation is about taking that 1 second of silence and living in it and stretching it out over a long period of time. So when I say art is a form of or a variety of mystical experience, that's one way of finding your way back into that. Because I think we've also, a lot of us have had that ecstatic or this moment of you just lose yourself in a song, at the club, at a show, maybe looking at a painting or a photograph or a piece of literature. And those are also aesthetic experiences. And so religion then is, to me, also a variety of aesthetics. And it is, I see art as a higher, broader, more inclusive rung on a sort of chart of mystical experiences, and then I think of religion. I mean, if you think of any religion, it has its own aesthetics, right? It has its own art that goes with it, its own visual aesthetics, its own sonority, the melodies of the hymns or the chants or whatever. So I think of those as genres or subgenres of art. Does that answer your question?
So building off of that and seeing how the poem is very inspired, theologically and mystically inspired, what would you characterize as your own belief in God, if you have such a belief? How has that affected your poetry?
So I talked about how I grew up with exposure to a lot of different traditions, and my parents have remained pretty focused on the Hindu tradition that we spent a lot of time on. But their attitude was to expose me to as many things as possible some of them were really weird. Like they took me to the big established religions, but really anytime we were anywhere and there was anyone who was even like remotely mystical or weird, we would go on. So that included like psychic surgeons and like other weird things. But their attitude was expose me to everything and let me choose what resonated with me. In my late teens, I felt like, well, you know, the Hindu practices are the ones that have kind of stuck with me, but they were also the ones that was most ingrained in me. So I had a strong resonance with that, and then after college, I went and I spent some time in India just by myself, kind of backpacking around, and it was actually like a really stressful, lonely couple of months. This was like, 20 years ago, so there were no cell phone services in the places I was going. And so while I was there, I started meditating for longer and longer stretches of time, to the point where I was like meditating for 4 hours a day. And what came out of that was a very personalized belief system, or basically a confidence to follow a personalized belief system. And so what I call myself now is a spiritual anarchist, and that I have a core pursuit of that mystical experience, but it is something I feel like all those traditions both have a lot to offer and also have a lot of pitfalls, right? I mean, religion historically is at the core of a lot of human conflict and suffering as well. And I think that happens when we get really entrenched in our beliefs and instead of being open to other people's ideas and beliefs. And what's interesting is when you study them at core, so many of them are really like encouraging you to find that spark of the divine in yourself anyway. Even the gurus are, and the cult leaders too, but then they're like, yeah, but you're not ready yet, so you haven't found it yet. So you should follow me a little longer. But so yeah, I think of myself as a spiritual anarchist.
Should we we can come up and talk to Janaka, and people who have places to go can go. Janaka brought some books in case you wanted to buy them, and some triangle, and pins, and a little chapbook, and also other books. But